January 1944. Somewhere above the Ruhr Valley, the air trembles. The first sound is distant, a low, growing thunder that rolls across the frozen fields and factory yards. Men and women working below look up from the smoke and snow, shielding their eyes against the pale winter sun. Then they see it. A vast web of contrails stretching from horizon to horizon. Silver shapes glint in the light. Hundreds of them, in formation so tight it looks like a single moving cloud of steel. Inside each of those bombers, 10 Americans sit in oxygen masks, faces hidden behind frost-covered goggles. The temperature outside the fuselage is 50 degrees below zero. Guns are loaded. Intercoms crackle with clipped voices. Below them, sirens begin to wail across the German towns. Luftwaffe radar stations plot the incoming waves, disbelief echoing through their headsets. This is not a single squadron. It is a sky full of them. 1,000 heavy bombers, the largest daylight armada the world had ever seen. As bombs begin to fall through the overcast, the war on the ground ceases to matter. The war for the sky has begun. By the beginning of 1943, the United States had fully committed to a vision of warfare that no other nation dared attempt: daylight precision bombing. The concept was bold, almost reckless. While the British Royal Air Force struck German cities at night to avoid heavy losses, the newly arrived 8th Air Force in Britain believed it could destroy Germany's war machine by day. Accurately, relentlessly, and in full view of the enemy. The Americans called it the industrial disarmament of the Reich. Instead of burning cities, they would shatter the factories, refineries, rail yards, and shipyards that kept the German army alive. Every mission was planned around the idea that a well-trained bombardier, equipped with the advanced Norden bomb sight, could drop a single bomb within a circle only a few dozen meters wide, even from 6 miles up. To make that vision possible, the U.S. brought to Europe 2 of the most rugged aircraft ever built, the Boeing B-17 Flying Fortress and the consolidated B-24 Liberator. Both could carry thousands of pounds of bombs deep into enemy territory and return home with engines torn apart or wings riddled by flak. Their defensive power came from 13 heavy machine guns and a disciplined formation pattern known as the combat box, designed to create a wall of overlapping fire. But courage and engineering alone couldn't protect crews from the grim mathematics of attrition. In 1943, missions over places like Schweinfurt, Regensburg, and Bremen were among the most dangerous operations in the war. Entire bomber groups vanished into clouds of black smoke and steel fragments. Out of 376 B-17s sent to Schweinfurt in August 1943, 60 never came home. Those that did return to England with shattered turrets, burned faces, and half their crews missing. Still, the doctrine stood. American generals believed that every factory destroyed today meant fewer tanks, fewer Messerschmitts, fewer bullets tomorrow. Germany's war machine was vast, but so was America's, and every loss was replaced faster than the Luftwaffe could understand. By the winter of 1943, the 8th Air Force had grown into a powerful instrument of industrial destruction, launching hundreds of aircraft each day from bases spread across East Anglia. Yet, with each mile they advanced deeper into the Reich. The cost rose, and waiting on the other side of the Channel, the Luftwaffe was learning, adapting, and building new weapons of its own. Germany's defense network was among the most sophisticated in the world. Across the occupied continent, a web of radar stations, Freya and Würzburg arrays, swept the skies from Denmark to the Bay of Biscay. Once American bombers were detected crossing the Channel, the Luftwaffe's command centers issued precise interception orders. Within minutes, dozens of Bf-109s and FW-190s roared into the air. Each squadron was directed by ground controllers who guided them to altitude and position for head-on attacks. To reach the heart of Germany, bomber crews had to cross 1,000 miles of flak and fighters. Anti-aircraft batteries ringed every major city and industrial complex. Shells burst at preset altitudes, filling the air with lethal fragments. Every black puff in the sky marked an explosion roughly the size of a small car. The crews inside those bombers learned to count seconds between detonations and to keep flying straight, no matter what. In response to such losses, American strategists debated whether daylight bombing was sustainable at all. Some called for joining the British in night raids, but General Ira Eaker, commander of the 8th Air Force, refused. The United States had promised to prove that technology and training could achieve precision in daylight. That promise was a matter of doctrine, pride, and industrial confidence. To survive the journey to and from targets like Regensburg or Leipzig, bombers needed protection beyond what their own machine guns could provide. The first escorts came in the form of P-47 Thunderbolts, tough, radial-engined fighters that could meet the bombers near the German border. But their range was limited, and after turning back, the formations often faced German interceptors alone for hundreds of miles. Losses mounted again through late 1943. Every raid brought home fewer men than it sent out. Morale was cracking. Pilots began marking missions on chalkboards, knowing 25 was the number that earned them a ticket home, if they lived that long. Then, quietly, the balance began to shift. American engineers introduced drop tanks that could extend fighter range deep into German airspace. And with them came a new aircraft, the P-51 Mustang. Sleek, long-legged and deadly above 25,000 feet. The Luftwaffe, once the hunter, was about to become the hunted. And as both sides prepared for the spring of 1944, the skies over Europe would soon witness a transformation, not just in technology, but in the very nature of war itself. At the heart of every daylight raid was not machinery, but men. 10-man crews, each a miniature world of fear, duty, and endurance. The pilot and co-pilot shared a cockpit where the air temperature hovered near -50. The navigator traced routes by stopwatch and dead reckoning, his hands trembling from the cold. The bombardier lay prone in the transparent nose, his eye pressed against the Norden bomb site, awaiting the moment to release thousands of pounds of high explosive with surgical precision. In the waist section, gunners stood beside twin 50-caliber Brownings, scanning for fighters darting in from the sun. The intercom crackled with clipped voices, terse, professional, but heavy with strain. Above, in the top turret, the flight engineer rotated endlessly, tracking shadows of enemy aircraft that might strike from above or behind. Every man aboard a flying fortress carried the same grim knowledge. In 1943, the average bomber crew's chance of completing a tour was less than 25%. Flak, frostbite, oxygen failure, or enemy fire all could claim a life before the bombs even left the bay. Yet discipline held. They trusted their training, their formation, and one another. No one broke rank. To drift from the formation meant isolation and certain death. Far below, German civilians watched those same formations pass overhead. To them, the bombers looked invincible, shimmering specks moving across the sun. But they also knew what followed. The scream of falling bombs, the earth trembling, the sudden silence after impact. Factories, homes, and churches disappeared within seconds. Inside Germany, propaganda painted the bombers as terror flyers, promising vengeance. But privately, officials understood the deeper truth. The Americans were not aiming for terror, but for industry, to strangle the Reich's capacity to fight. For every train yard destroyed, another panzer division stalled. For every refinery hit, hundreds of aircraft sat grounded. It was a battle of endurance, but also of nerves. One fought by the young, by men barely out of high school, who faced the greatest air defense network ever built. And high above them, the cold blue sky became both ally and executioner. As technology advanced, so too did the tactics that would determine who ruled those skies. Beneath the courage and human cost lay a war of innovation, fought in frequencies, formations, and precision. Every daylight mission was a moving puzzle of timing and geometry. Hundreds of bombers climbed from their airfields in England, spiraling upward in tight circles until they merged into vast formations stretching for miles. The goal was cohesion, the combat box, a three-dimensional pattern that allowed overlapping arcs of defensive fire. Each fortress protected the next, forming what crews called a flying fortress wall. At the center of that formation sat the bombardier and his instrument, the Norden bomb sight. It was a mechanical computer, calibrated to correct for wind, airspeed, and altitude. In theory, it allowed bombs to strike within 100 feet of their target. Crews treated it as sacred, often swearing an oath never to let it fall into enemy hands. German defenses countered with precision of their own. Radar operators at Würzburg stations tracked incoming waves, calculating altitude and direction. Their data fed to anti-aircraft batteries that filled the sky with timed explosions, a black iron canopy through which the bombers had to fly. Higher still, Jagdgeschwader formations of Bf-109s and Fw-190s prepared for coordinated attacks, often approaching head-on to exploit the bombers' weakest angles. But by 1944, American innovation was closing every gap. New radio jammers disrupted German radar signals. Chaff, thin aluminum strips released in clouds, created phantom echoes, confusing enemy gunners. And then came the long-range escorts, P-51 Mustangs equipped with drop tanks, capable of following the bombers all the way to Berlin and back. For the first time, American formations arrived over their targets with friendly fighters still overhead. German pilots, once confident predators, now found themselves hunted. The sky that had once belonged to the Luftwaffe was shrinking by the day. These advancements were not simply mechanical, they were strategic expressions of America's industrial might. Every improvement came from a vast network of engineers, factories, and intelligence units working around the clock. In this new kind of war, innovation itself was a weapon. And in February 1944, all those elements, courage, industry, and relentless adaptation, would converge into one of the most decisive weeks in aviation history. The morning skies over Europe were clear. Engines thundered across the English countryside as crews strapped in for what would become one of the most ambitious aerial operations of the entire war. The mission was codenamed Operation Argument, but airmen simply called it Big Week. The objective was direct and devastating: to destroy the German aircraft industry once and for all. Factories in Leipzig, Gotha, Brunswick, Regensburg, and Augsburg were marked as primary targets. Hitler's Reich was producing hundreds of new fighters every month, and Allied planners knew that unless those assembly lines were crippled, the invasion of Western Europe would be impossible. Over 6 consecutive days, the 8th Air Force in Britain and the 15th Air Force in Italy launched wave after wave of bombers, more than 3,800 sorties in total. Each day, hundreds of B-17s and B-24s crossed into Germany, escorted by the newly arrived P-51 Mustangs. The Luftwaffe rose to meet them with everything it had left. Veteran squadrons scrambled from fields across Bavaria and Saxony, diving through the formations in desperate, coordinated attacks. The sky erupted in a storm of tracers, flak bursts, and burning fuel. Crews described it as flying through a thundercloud made of metal. In the chaos, American gunners fought with icy precision. Waist gunners tracked German fighters as they screamed past at closing speeds of 600 miles per hour. Each second mattered. The top turret swung, the nose gun fired, and for a brief moment, the sky became a blinding whirl of fire and smoke. Losses were heavy. On February 24th alone, the 8th Air Force lost 41 bombers and over 400 men. But by the end of the week, the strategic picture had changed. Hundreds of German aircraft lay destroyed, and more critically, the Luftwaffe had been forced to commit its reserves. Every fighter scrambled to defend the factories, leaving fewer planes to protect cities, oil plants, and rail lines. The Americans had finally forced Germany into the open. From this moment forward, the skies over Europe would never be the same. By late February 1944, the once invincible Luftwaffe was bleeding. What German commanders feared most was now reality. Long-range American escorts flying deep into the heart of the Reich. The P-51 Mustang changed everything. With its efficient Merlin engine, laminar flow wings, and external fuel tanks, it could fly to Berlin, fight, and return, a range unmatched by any Allied fighter before it. The Mustang wasn't just fast, it was elegant, stable, and deadly. Its pilots could dive, climb, and turn with precision, outclassing nearly every German aircraft in the air. For bomber crews, the sight of the slender-winged P-51s sliding into formation beside them was almost spiritual. Little friends, they called them. Escorting the bombers at 25,000 feet, they fanned out ahead to clear the skies. When German fighters appeared, the Mustangs pounced. No longer defensive, but predatory. The impact was immediate. In a single month, the Luftwaffe lost over one-third of its operational fighter strength. Young, barely trained German pilots were thrown into hopeless battles against experienced American aces. Entire squadrons were decimated before they even reached the bomber streams. For Germany, the psychological shock was immense. Radar operators tracking American formations noticed something terrifying. The bombers no longer turned back at the old limits. The raids now reached Leipzig, Berlin, and Munich, unescorted no longer. The sky that had once been a defensive shield now became a killing field. On March 6, 1944, the 8th Air Force launched its first full-scale daylight raid on Berlin. More than 600 bombers, guarded by swarms of P-51s, crossed into German airspace. The capital that had once boasted of invulnerability saw its factories and rail centers engulfed in daylight fire. In one mission, the myth of Luftwaffe superiority vanished. The balance of the air war had shifted irreversibly. From that moment on, Germany could no longer fight on its own terms. The skies belonged to the Americans, and the world was about to witness what air supremacy truly meant. When the smoke of Big Week cleared, Germany's skies told a new story, one of exhaustion, destruction, and inevitability across the Reich. The remains of once proud aircraft plants lay in ruins. The Messerschmitt assembly halls at Regensburg and the Focke-Wulf factories at Gotha and Marienburg were reduced to twisted metal and silent machinery. Thousands of German workers sifted through debris where wings and engines had been built only days before. The numbers were devastating. During February 1944 alone, the Luftwaffe lost more than 600 fighters and an irreplaceable corps of trained pilots. Production continued on paper, but fuel shortages, bombing damage, and chaos in logistics crippled real output. The German Air Force that had once terrorized Europe was now being bled dry in defense of its own homeland. For the Americans, the cost was also heavy. Hundreds of aircraft and thousands of lives. Yet, for the first time, the balance sheet favored them. Each bomber lost could be replaced in days. Each pilot was trained by a machine-like system that turned out new crews faster than Germany could respond. Beyond the physical destruction, a more subtle victory was unfolding. The loss of German morale. Civilians who once cheered Luftwaffe parades now watched helplessly as sirens wailed daily. Cities that had known quiet mornings were now under constant threat. Children practiced shelter drills as the thrum of engines grew familiar, a sound that no longer promised victory, but fear. Intelligence reports captured the change in tone among German commanders. They spoke of untenable losses, exhausted crews, and a defensive war with no end. The daylight raids had done what months of ground combat could not. They had brought the Reich to the edge of collapse. And yet, the bombing campaign was far from over. Its next stage would push even deeper into the heart of Germany, striking at the very lifeblood of its war machine. Fuel. By the summer of 1944, the American bombing campaign had evolved into a weapon of total strategic dominance. The skies above Europe belonged almost entirely to the Allies. From dawn to dusk, formations of B-17s and B-24s, escorted by P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts, crossed the Channel in unbroken waves. With air superiority secured, Allied planners turned their attention to Germany's most vital weakness: oil. Without fuel, even the most advanced tanks, aircraft, and trucks were nothing more than metal shells. Beginning in May 1944, the 8th and 15th Air Forces launched concentrated attacks on synthetic fuel plants at Leuna, Porlitz, and Merseburg. Each raid crippled production further, plunging the Reich into a spiral of paralysis. The Luftwaffe tried to resist, but its strength was gone. Lacking fuel for training, new pilots went into battle with barely a handful of flight hours. Many never returned from their first mission. American pilots, now confident and experienced, hunted freely over German airspace, strafing railways, airfields, and convoys with near impunity. The daylight raids also supported Operation Overlord, the invasion of Normandy. Weeks before D-Day, bombers obliterated rail junctions, bridges, and communication hubs, isolating German forces in France. On June 6, 1944, when Allied troops stormed the beaches, the Luftwaffe was almost absent. Fewer than 24 German aircraft appeared over the invasion zone, a testament to how completely the daylight bombing campaign had broken their power. For civilians, the war in the air had become a daily ordeal. Entire neighborhoods vanished in clouds of dust and fire. Yet amid the destruction, a grim understanding took root. The Reich could no longer defend its skies. By the end of 1944, American bombers flew wherever they wished. Cities that had once mocked the daylight threat: Berlin, Hamburg, Dresden, now looked upward in dread whenever the morning sky began to hum. Germany's defeat was no longer a question of if, but when, and when the silence finally came, it carried the sound of a world forever changed. When the last raids ended and the contrails faded into quiet skies, Europe was no longer the same. The daylight bombing campaign had transformed the very idea of warfare, shifting the front line from the ground to the heavens. For the men who flew those missions, victory carried a heavy silence. They had seen friends vanish in fire, watched cities disappear beneath clouds of dust, and felt the weight of decisions measured in thousands of lives. Their courage had been mechanical, repetitive, unrelenting. But their humanity never vanished. Each mission demanded composure in the face of terror, precision amid chaos, and faith in machines that were often the only things keeping them alive. For Germany, the war in the air was a reckoning. The Reich that once believed itself untouchable had learned the cost of total war. That industry, pride, and ideology could not withstand the relentless rhythm of American production and willpower. The 8th Air Force had proven what American strategists once only theorized: that command of the air could dictate the outcome of an entire war. The skies had become both a weapon and a warning, a reminder of how technology, when paired with resolve, could reshape history itself. In the years that followed, the lessons of those daylight raids would echo far beyond Europe, into the jet age, into Cold War deterrence, into every doctrine that placed air superiority at the heart of modern conflict. But above all, the story of those 1,000 bombers remains a story of endurance, of young men who climbed into thin, frozen air to challenge an empire from 30,000 feet. When they returned, the sky behind them was darker, quieter, and changed forever.